But there's something about Van Gogh's legacy which is much more important than his fathering this or that ism of modern art. Vincent's passionate belief was that people wouldn't just see his pictures, but feel the rush of life in them.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most trusted voice in true crime. Although it's the 9th of June, we are doing a letter today, even though the letter actually arrived from Arles on the 10th of June, but there's another letter to deal with from Vincent to Theo and Joe on the 10th, so we'll do that tomorrow. The reason I want to deal with today, a letter today, is I also want to deal with a story that appeared on CNN and a couple of other major mainstream news channels dealing with the imminent auction, the upcoming auction of a letter, a really interesting letter between Van Gogh and, I think it was actually addressed to Emile Bernard, that is a mutual friend of Vincent's and Paul Gauguin. So it's not written to his brother, and you can kind of tell, given the sort of fairly racy content in the letter. Not that Theo was that much of a prude, and it seemed like quite common for the art crowd to visit brothels. So nothing is new about this. What is new is that this letter, that is, as I say, co-written by Vincent van Gogh and Paul Gauguin, is going up for auction, and this gives you an idea of why Van Gogh is such a big deal. Just this letter is probably going to reach a sort of a auction price of $282,000. Just the letter. So there's no art to speak of in the letter. So when it comes to Van Gogh, artifacts related to him are really worth a fortune. So in this episode, we're going to deal with, first of all, the letter from Mrs Ginoux, and it's a very short letter, so we're not going to spend very long on that, and we're also not going to spend too much time on the letter from 1888, or I think November 1888. We're not going to spend too much time on that either. We will spend quite a lot of time on the letter from Vincent to his brother, dealing with the visit. Remember in the previous episode we spoke about an invitation from Dr. Gachet. We're going to talk about what happened after that. Did the family come and visit? What was the weather okay? How did that sort of pan out, right? What was Vincent's feelings following that Sunday? So we're going to deal with that tomorrow. But before we get to today's episode, if you haven't subscribed yet to this channel, please do. Please go to the effort to like, share, leave a comment. I also just want to thank the new subscribers. We've passed the 12,000 mark, so thank you very much for that. For those interested in the Madeleine McCann case, I've put an hour-long discussion with a fellow patron on Patreon, someone in Melbourne, that we spoke about the Madeleine McCann case. What do we make of the latest evidence? And it's hard for me to not be extremely sarcastic about it. I've just put up a tweet. Madeleine McCann, 13-year breakthrough, suspect found. It's a huge deal, but the authorities won't arrest or charge him. In fact, he's about to be released. But really, it's a very, very, very big deal. No, really. No, it really, really is. So I am actually doing a follow-up episode on that on this channel, just really dealing with the aftermath to Smithman, and that's going to be quite an interesting episode. So look out for that. Probably out, if not tomorrow, the day after. Okay, and so let's deal with the letter from Mrs Ginoux to Vincent van Gogh. Now, in case you don't know, Mrs Ginoux was the subject of the painting that he did that Dr. Gachet kind of went crazy about. the Arlesienne. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, but literally means woman from Arles. And it was based on this portrait that Dr. Gachet kind of said, well, can you do my portrait as well? And so that's exactly what he did. He did the famous portrait of Dr. Gachet very early on in his stay, and that went on to become one of the most valuable paintings ever in the world, and certainly Vincent van Gogh's most valuable painting. If you're not sure of Mrs Ginoux, the relationship between Mrs Ginoux and Van Gogh, and also her husband Joseph, they were actually the people who stayed downstairs. They owned a cafe downstairs of the Yellow House, and that is how Van Gogh knew them. I think he rented from them the Yellow House, or the room upstairs. So I'll put a link in the description so you can read a little bit about this painting, which has come up recently in the correspondence. It's the Arlesienne. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, but it means the woman from Arles, and the subject is Madame Ginoux, right? She married Joseph Ginoux in 1866, and they ran the Café de la Gare, which basically means the cafe of the station. Not far from the train station, at 30 Place Lamartine. That building unfortunately was destroyed when a World War II bomb landed on it. It destroyed the Yellow House and also the cafe underneath it. The cafe is no more, but the building behind it survives, and so does the bridge connecting the railway to the station. Van Gogh lodged there from May to mid-September 1888. He had the Yellow House in Arles furnished, and you can kind of hear him bickering in his last letter to Theo, just that he can't understand why he hasn't heard back from the Ginoux, and he's thinking of sort of threatening them with legal action even. He's just kind of very annoyed that he wants his furniture, and he's so sort of hard up that he is sort of going to make sure that he gets his furniture. He's not going to buy new furniture. And he sort of complains in the previous letter to his brother, where he says, I guess it's a different culture in the south of France, that if you buy furniture and you leave a place, then you leave the furniture behind, And he said, it's different in the north where you take it along. I've moved quite a lot in my life, and I've often, taken furniture with, but there certainly have been times when I've left certain elements behind. I know when I left Johannesburg for the last time, I left some of my own pictures that I'd drawn and some of my own possessions with somebody, and never got them back. I suspected that person was a drug addict, and I suspected that she was very enthusiastic about taking custody of my stuff. Just seemed a bit strange that she was so enthusiastic about it. And then when I followed up, it was like, well, what are you looking at me for? I don't have it, And so I was pretty annoyed about that as well. But I don't know what it's been like for you, but obviously, Van Gogh, it was a case that he felt he couldn't afford to just leave the furniture. And the furniture involved things like his bed and also his, I think, 1 or 2 chairs. It certainly wasn't a lot, but it was enough for him to worry about it. And so finally he's getting this letter from Marie Ginoux, right? It's quite interesting that he had quite a good relationship with her and also with her husband. One could say it was a business relationship because he was renting from them. On the Wikipedia page, it's described as a more or less commercial relationship. Vincent also painted the cafe, the night cafe, and he kind of described it as a place where someone could sort of where one could ruin oneself. This is something that Van Gogh himself wrote on September 9th to Theo. He said, it's a place where one could go mad or commit a crime. And then he tried to express the kind of debauchery, the sort of ominous overtones. He talks about the devil's furnace of pale sulfur, and anyway, basically just saying that through the colors, the blood red and the dark yellow and the green table, he sort of was trying to convey the sense that this is a place where you can really, go down the road to the dark side, so to speak. And if you think about that aspect, the fact that the yellow house, this dwelling of Van Gogh's, was above a bar, you can imagine how that just wouldn't be a good thing for a guy like Van Gogh. He wouldn't be able to resist not drinking, or it would be hard for him, and also it would be hard for him to resist sort of womanizing and making a nuisance of himself. And then besides that, when he had another male companion, how hard would it be for the both of them not to sort of, after a day's painting, sort of go downstairs, have one drink becomes another, and then they go out for a night on the town, kind of thing, and eventually it all ends in tears, doesn't it? Now in Arles, it's a similar situation. He's staying in an inn, he's staying in a little room upstairs, and then downstairs, well, it's not really a bar, it's more like a restaurant, and it's just a little bit more decent. It's sort of, I've sat there and dined myself, and it's just definitely a place where you would have maybe families coming together, and just certainly not as, I guess, seedy as a bar near a train station. You're going to have a different clientele at the place in Arles, more farmers and sort of well-to-do folk. Now, what's interesting with the Le Arlesian Wikipedia page, it talks about how Gauguin's arrival in Arles altered the situation. In other words, that Van Gogh had kind of a more or less commercial relationship with Mrs Ginoux, and then when Gauguin arrived, things changed, and it refers to his courtship charming the lady, and that kind of sounds like Gauguin kind of courted this married woman, Mrs Ginoux, and she was charmed by him. She liked Gauguin. She was maybe attracted to him. She found him interesting or something like that. And at that time she was 40 years of age, and then in the first few days of November she actually sat down to have her portrait done by Gauguin, and I guess Van Gogh kind of chimed in, and he sort of also got something out of it, and Gauguin produced a charcoal drawing, and then Vincent produced a full-scale painting. Gauguin did sort of follow up this sketch with another painting which is of the night cafe, kind of in the background. You sort of see the pool table and the very blood red walls, and you have the little cat sort of perched behind the leg of the pool table. So and that's just shows that Gauguin was quite invested in this woman to some extent, not only doing the charcoal sketch but also doing the painting. And I think of the two artists, I kind of prefer Gauguin's interpretation of the cafe, not so much the portrait, but what is going on in the background. I certainly prefer it to the portrait Vincent van Gogh did of her, which seems a bit bland and dull. Okay, so are you ready to deal with Mrs Ginoux's letter to Vincent? And it's dated the 10th of June 1890, and we can actually see the original sample, and it's very elegantly written. Definitely different penmanship from Vincent van Gogh. The writing is more sort of flowery and kind of flamboyant, and she writes to him Mr. Vincent, which is quite interesting. not Dear Vincent, and not Dear Mr. Van Gogh or whatever. Dear Mr. Vincent, or Mr. Vincent. That's her answer. That's how she addresses him. And it's kind of curt. She says, "I'm replying to your 2 letters. If we have delayed so long, it is that my husband has been ill. We had a little accident. We had some friends. As chance had it, they were present at the arrival of the bullocks, and the bullock butted him in the ribs. He could not walk. It gave him great pain. As for me, I am much better, but I am still very tired. I cannot do anything." So she's kind of giving her excuse that there was the arrival of the bullocks. I'm not 100% sure what this refers to, but I do know there are festivals in Arles, and they sometimes celebrate this sort of thing, and obviously they have that amphitheater, so I'm not quite sure whether this had anything to do with bullfighting or anything like that, but in any event, the husband actually got literally knocked over by a bull, I guess, and then he was in pain, and he needed some time to recover from that. And I don't know whether she was also knocked down or whether she was just running around looking after her husband, but one kind of gets the idea. It's almost like the running of the bulls. It's a sort of a party, and people kind of get physically involved in running around and doing whatever. So that seems to be the perspective to this whole thing. In any event, she goes on to say, on Saturday he will send what you ask of us. So in other words, very soon he's going to send your furniture to you. But he's just been sort of kind of incapacitated by this injury. She goes on to say, he's much better. He can start to work in a few days. We would really have wanted to see you before leaving. We really regretted that you did not come here to Arles. So she's kind of saying, it's why didn't you come here to say goodbye? That is quite interesting, is that he left in such a hurry that he didn't do that. And then she goes on to say, you have compliments from all the neighbors. Mrs. Bressy says they will go and see you for a day or 2 in Paris. Nothing else for the moment. Give us news of yourself sometimes. You will give us great pleasure. We shall not remain so long in giving you a reply. I shall end. My husband joins me in shaking your hand in our hearts and in friendship. Mrs. Ginoux. So, and then she says, on Saturday he will send you your things to your address which you sent us. And so it's quite a short letter. It's still fairly friendly. She says, the neighbors still compliment you, and she seems to be fairly sort of giving a good account of how people think of Vincent, despite everything that's happened. There's still people that apparently think well of him. You can make of the letter what you will. There is an article in the Telegraph, and it refers to the £22 million smile of friend who betrayed Van Gogh, and it's a article about the portrait Les Arlesiennes, and it refers to Mrs Ginoux, one of the few to befriend Van Gogh. But it says, had the troubled artist known the truth, he might have portrayed her less flatteringly. In 1890, just months before his suicide, Van Gogh painted Les Arlesiennes, which sold for £22 million at Christie's in New York on Tuesday, and that is around about May 2006, so about 14 years ago. It sold for £22 million. And again, you can say, well, blah blah blah, who cares about this portrait? Well, a lot of people do care. It's everything that he does is worth a fortune, and so this is too. They talk about research by Martin Gayford, historian that reveals that Joseph Ginoux was one of the main witnesses supporting Van Gogh's detention at a tribunal examining the artist's mental health. And, apparently Van Gogh was bitter about this campaign, and because of it, he decided to preempt it by voluntarily entering the asylum. And apparently he didn't know that the Ginoux family were involved. So you kind of have this two-faced thing where the Ginoux family kind of had this guy kicked out of the Yellow House, and now they're sort of saying, sorry that we haven't written to you, and we've got no idea why you didn't come and visit us, and so on and so on. Meanwhile, they're the people who sort of wanted to get rid of him. They didn't like how much he was drinking, didn't like how he was living in the place, and didn't like the whole thing with the police coming around and him cutting off his ear and all the drama. So just for reference, when this picture of the Les Arlésiens sold, which it was kind of meant apparently to be a gift for Gauguin, but he never received it. It was the second highest ever sale of Impressionist and modern art at Christie's. So it's quite a big deal. And now let's deal with the letter written by Van Gogh and Gauguin. So it was co-written between the two of them. And it talks about their visits to French brothels. Now, again, the letter is going to sell for a fortune, apparently, anywhere from $200,000 to almost $300,000 just for this little letter. And that's going to go under the hammer in Paris next week, Tuesday. And it was addressed to Émile Bernard, and it talks about Gauguin's instincts, that he's sort of got the instincts of a wild beast, and that with Gauguin, this is what Vincent says, that with Gauguin, blood and sex have the edge over ambitions. Almost like Gauguin is more interested in blood and sex than painting, than in getting somewhere as an artist or whatever. And then he also goes on to say, we've made some excursions in the brothels, and it's likely that we'll eventually go there often to work. He says, at the moment, Gauguin has a canvas in progress of the same night cafe that I also painted, but with figures seen in the brothels. It promises to become a beautiful thing. So that's quite interesting. So it's quite interesting that the people in the brothels are now in this cafe. Now, I'm not sure if he is imagining them there, or whether that's actually where they would sort of hang out, the brothel crowd. The reason that I want to really highlight this is to draw your attention to the fact that that Vincent befriends or is friends with Gauguin, right? So you kind of get to know Vincent through Gauguin, through his appetites. And the same can actually be said for Dr. Gachet, is that Vincent kind of likens the doctor to himself. He says he's a lot like me. He says morally he's the same as me. We have the same beliefs. We have the same temperament. And so one's also got to say, well, Dr. Gachet was very much ensconced in the art crowd. He wasn't an artist per se. He was trying to be an artist. He was trying to, get into that whole sort of vibe. But he was certainly ensconced within the art crowd, and he'd also inherited quite a lot of money, so he was sort of a man of leisure to some extent as well. So Vincent van Gogh's saying, wow, this guy looks like me, and I'm actually more worried about him than... What did he say? He said something like, this guy's actually madder than I am, or more nervous than I am, or something like that, or more troubled than I am. So it does make one wonder, did Dr. Gachet share Vincent's enjoyment of women? And That's not to cast aspersions, not to say, wow, this doctor, was he some kind of, moral deviant. That's not really the case. In Paris at that time, it was kind of quite common for people to do that. It wasn't necessarily done, how can I put it? It wasn't top secret, but it was also not something that everybody necessarily knew about. It was sort of somewhere in the middle. And of course, they didn't necessarily know that you could pick up the kinds of diseases that we know about today. So anyway, at that time it was fairly well known, fairly common practice for people to do that. And if you think that that's strange, well, just think about the characters in the story: Theo, Vincent, Gogh, Gauguin, and then we theorizing that Dr. Gachet did this as well. And then also Emile Bernard. They wouldn't be talking to him about the fun that they were having if he didn't do the same thing himself. So it's almost like everybody in the story was sort of caught up in the same sort of revelry. Doesn't it seem like that? Now, where things get quite interesting is you can see how something went wrong with Gogh and Van Gogh that caused Mrs Ginoux and her husband not to be very happy. And one might say, well, it was the drinking, but one might also say it was the womanizing. And there may also have been jealousy or problems around this whole idea of flirting with Mrs Ginoux and who knows what else. And so that's one thing. The other thing is, think about a situation where Vincent and Dr. Gachet get along like a house on fire, and they're very much similar men, and they've got similar desires and similar interests and whatever. Meanwhile, Dr. Gachet's got a daughter. Now, it's one thing to like this guy you're hanging out with and do certain things together, but what happens when this guy that you've been hanging out with starts to sort of eye your daughter? How are you going to feel about that? So I'm going to leave that with you. I've sort of made clear what I'm trying to, the case that I'm trying to build. I'm going to leave that thought with you, and we will carry on with the correspondence. This time a letter from Vincent to his brother and his wife Jo. We'll do that tomorrow. So look out for that. I'm sure a lot of you are feeling that things are getting very interesting at the moment. Things are getting very, very interesting in terms of Van Gogh's story. Bear in mind we are at basically a month and 2 weeks away from Vincent's death, so time's sort of racing towards that. The last month's going to go by really, really quickly, so we're looking at what is happening in June. He's already painted some of the most well-known Van Gogh paintings. He's already gone through them, so that's certainly quite interesting. Again, look out for further coverage of the Madeleine McCann case on this channel, and again, please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys next time.